The gunshot pierced the serene New Mexico dusk, shattering the quiet of Albuquerque's Main Street as Clara O'Malley watched her father collapse in a heap of dust and blood. The year was 1885, and at 20 years old, Clara had just witnessed the end of everything she had ever known. "Papa!" She screamed, rushing to her father's side, her skirts gathering dirt as she knelt beside him. Thomas O'Malley, the town's only doctor and her beloved father, lay dying with a bullet lodged in his chest, the result of a drunken dispute at the saloon he'd been called to. "Clara, my girl," he gasped, blood staining his once pristine white shirt, "promise me you'll be taken care of." Clara clutched his hand, tears streaming down her face. "I promise, Papa, just hold on." But Thomas O'Malley had other plans. With his final breaths, he called over the town sheriff who had arrived at the scene. "Sheriff, fetch Ethan Summers. I want him to marry my daughter." Clara's head snapped up. "What? Papa, no," but her father's eyes were resolute. "He owes me a debt. He's a good man. He'll provide for you." And with those final words, Thomas O'Malley closed his eyes forever. 3 days later, Clara stood in the small white church at the edge of town, wearing her mother's wedding dress that had been packed away since her death 10 years prior. The dress hung loosely on her slender frame, much like the weight of her father's last request. She barely knew Ethan Summers, only that he was a cattle rancher who lived on the outskirts of town, a man who kept to himself, but was known for his fairness and hard work. Ethan Summers stood at the altar, his tall frame rigid in an ill-fitting suit, his dark blonde hair combed back, though a few stubborn strands fell across his forehead. His green eyes looked as trapped as she felt. At 32, he was a confirmed bachelor, and now he was being forced into marriage due to some mysterious debt owed to her father. The ceremony was brief, attended only by a handful of townspeople who had come out of respect for the deceased doctor. No one smiled, least of all the bride and groom. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Ethan barely brushed his lips against her cheek, a gesture so formal and cold that Clara felt a chill despite the warm May afternoon. The ride to Ethan's ranch was silent, save for the creaking of the wagon and the rhythmic clopping of the horse's hooves. Clara stared at her hands folded in her lap, the simple gold band on her finger feeling like a shackle. Ethan's ranch was modest but well-maintained. A 2-story house stood proudly, with a large barn and several corrals spread out behind it. A few ranch hands tipped their hats as the wagon pulled up, their curious gazes lingering on Clara. "This is it," Ethan said, his first words to her since they'd left the church. He helped her down from the wagon, his touch impersonal, as if he was handling fragile china. Clara followed him into the house, her steps heavy. The interior was surprisingly comfortable, with worn but clean furniture and a few touches that spoke of care: curtains on the windows, a colorful quilt on the back of a chair. "Your room is upstairs, first door on the right," Ethan said, removing his hat. "Mine's at the end of the hall, Mrs. Donovan comes 3 times a week to help with cooking and cleaning, but she's not here today. There's food in the pantry if you're hungry." Clara nodded, fighting back tears. It was all so businesslike, so devoid of emotion. This wasn't a marriage, it was an arrangement, a debt being paid. "Why did you agree to this?" she asked suddenly, her voice small in the quiet house. Ethan's shoulders tensed. "Your father saved my life once, said I owed him a debt, when the sheriff came to tell me his dying wish." He trailed off, then straightened his shoulders. "I'm a man of my word, Mrs. Summers." The formality of the title stung. "I don't even know you," Clara whispered for a moment. Something flickered in Ethan's eyes, perhaps regret or sympathy. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "I'll be out with the cattle until sundown. Make yourself at home." And with that, he walked out, leaving Clara alone in the house that was now supposed to be her home. That night, Clara lay in her new bed, staring at the ceiling. The sheets smelled of sunshine and soap, but they were as strange to her as the man she had married. She had left her small room above her father's practice for this foreign place, filled with the belongings of a man she barely knew. In the morning, Clara woke to the sounds of activity outside. She dressed quickly in one of her simple day dresses and made her way downstairs. The house was empty, but coffee was brewing on the stove. She poured herself a cup, then ventured outside. Ethan was in the corral, breaking a horse. He moved with a confidence and grace that contrasted sharply with his awkward demeanor the day before. The horse bucked and snorted, but Ethan stayed seated, his body moving in rhythm with the animal's attempts to throw him. Clara watched, mesmerized despite herself. After a few minutes, the horse settled and Ethan dismounted smoothly, patting the animal's neck before noticing Clara standing at the edge of the corral. "Morning," he said, tipping his hat. "Did you find everything you needed?" Clara nodded. "Yes, thank you, the coffee was good." An awkward silence fell between them. "I should get back to town today," Clara said finally. "I need to pack up my father's things and decide what to do with his practice." Ethan frowned. "It's not proper for you to stay in town alone." Clara lifted her chin. "I've been managing on my own since my mother died when I was 10. I think I can handle a day in town." Ethan's frown deepened, but he nodded. "I'll take you. I need to pick up supplies anyway." The ride into Albuquerque was quiet, the tension between them palpable. As they approached the town, Clara felt a mix of relief and sadness. This had been her home, and now she was a visitor. "I'll meet you at the general store in 2 hours," Ethan said as he helped her down from the wagon. Clara nodded and walked toward her father's practice, her heart heavy. The small building looked abandoned already, though it had been less than a week since her father's death. Inside, everything was as he had left it: medical books on the shelves, instruments neatly arranged, the faint smell of antiseptic hanging in the air. She began to sort through his personal belongings, separating items to keep, donate, or sell. As she worked, memories flooded her of watching her father tend to patients, of learning from him as he taught her about herbs and remedies, of their quiet evenings together after a long day. A knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Mrs. Thompson, the wife of the local banker, standing there with a casserole dish. "I heard you were in town, dear," the older woman said, her eyes filled with sympathy. "I thought you might need some comfort food." Clara accepted the dish with a smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson, that's very kind." The woman hesitated. "How are things with Mr. Summers?" Clara stiffened. "Fine, thank you." Mrs. Thompson patted her arm. "He's a good man, Clara. Your father knew what he was doing." It may not seem like it now, but sometimes duty can lead to unexpected happiness. After Mrs. Thompson left, Clara sat down heavily on her father's chair, the casserole forgotten on his desk. Duty. That's what this marriage was: a duty, an obligation. Not a union of love or even mutual respect, but a debt being repaid. 2 hours later, Clara met Ethan at the general store as promised. He had loaded the wagon with supplies and was waiting for her, his face unreadable as she approached with a small trunk of her father's belongings. "Is that all you're taking?" he asked, helping her load the trunk. "For now," Clara replied. "I'll need to come back to deal with the medical supplies and books." Ethan nodded. "I can build you some shelves at the ranch for the books." The offer surprised her. "Thank you," she said softly. As they rode back to the ranch, Clara found herself studying Ethan's profile. His strong jaw was set, his eyes focused on the road ahead. He was handsome, she had to admit, in a rugged, weathered way that spoke of years working under the New Mexico sun. "How did my father save your life?" she asked suddenly. Ethan's hands tightened on the reins. It was 5 years ago. I got caught in a flash flood trying to save some of my cattle. Broke my leg, several ribs, and had a nasty head wound. Your father found me, brought me back to his practice, and nursed me back to health for weeks. Wouldn't take a penny for it either. Clara smiled sadly. That sounds like Papa. He was a good man, Ethan said quietly. One of the best I've known. Back at the ranch, Clara found herself at loose ends. The house was well kept thanks to Mrs. Donovan, and there seemed little for her to do. She wandered outside, watching as Ethan and his men worked with the cattle in the distance. One of the ranch hands, a young man named Jake, approached her. "Madam, Mr. Summers asked me to tell you that he'll be late for supper. There's a sick calf he's tending to." Clara nodded, then had a thought. "Is the calf very ill?" Jake shrugged. "Mr. Summers thinks it'll pull through, but it's touch and go." "I might be able to help," Clara said. "My father taught me a lot about animal medicine." Jake looked skeptical but led her to the barn where Ethan was kneeling beside a small calf, his large hands gentle as he examined it. "Ethan," Clara said, approaching cautiously. "I thought I might be able to help." He looked up, surprise evident on his face. "You know about livestock?" "My father treated animals when there was no veterinarian available," Clara explained. "I assisted him." Ethan hesitated, then moved aside. "It's having trouble breathing. Might be pneumonia." Clara knelt beside the calf, placing her ear against its chest. The congestion was evident in its labored breaths. "Do you have any eucalyptus oil? And honey?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Honey, yes. Eucalyptus, no." "Pine needles can work as a substitute," Clara said. "Boiled into a strong tea with honey, it'll help clear the lungs." Ethan nodded to Jake, who hurried off to gather the supplies. For the next hour, Clara and Ethan worked side by side, preparing the remedy and administering it to the calf. Their hands brushed occasionally, and each time Clara felt a strange jolt of awareness. By the time they finished, the calf's breathing had eased slightly. "We'll need to dose it again in a few hours," Clara said, wiping her hands on her apron. Ethan nodded, studying her with new eyes. "You're good at this." "I had a good teacher," she replied softly. That night, they ate supper together for the first time. Ethan had cleaned up, changing his dirty work clothes for a clean shirt and pants. His hair was damp from washing, and Clara found herself noticing the way it curled slightly at the ends. "The calf is doing better," Ethan said as they ate the stew Clara had prepared. "Your remedy seems to be working." Clara smiled, pleased. "I'm glad I could help." "Your father mentioned you helped in his practice," Ethan said. "Said you had a natural talent for healing." "He wanted me to go to medical school," Clara said, then laughed bitterly. "Not that any would accept me. Women doctors aren't exactly common." "Your father was ahead of his time," Ethan remarked. "He believed people should follow their talents, regardless of what society dictated." Clara looked up, surprised by his insight. "Yes, he did." After supper, they sat on the porch, watching as the sun set over the New Mexico landscape, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The silence between them was less strained than before. "I know this isn't what you wanted," Ethan said suddenly, his voice low. "Being married to a stranger living out here away from town." Clara wrapped her arms around herself. "No, it wasn't." Ethan turned to look at her, his eyes serious in the fading light. "I want you to know that I'll honor our marriage, but I don't expect. That is, I won't demand." He cleared his throat. "You have your room and I have mine. I won't impose on you." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks, understanding his meaning. "Thank you," she whispered, though part of her wondered why she felt a twinge of disappointment at his words. The next morning, Clara woke early, determined to make herself useful. She prepared breakfast before Ethan came down, setting a plate of eggs and bacon on the table just as he entered the kitchen. "You didn't have to do this," he said, though he sat down and began eating with appreciation. "I need to earn my keep," Clara replied, sitting across from him with her own plate. Ethan frowned. "You're my wife, not my servant. In name only," Clara reminded him gently. Something flickered in Ethan's eyes, hurt, perhaps, or resignation. "Even so, I don't expect you to wait on me." After breakfast, Clara checked on the sick calf, pleased to find it much improved. As she was leaving the barn, she noticed a small garden plot behind the house, overgrown with weeds. Ethan found her there an hour later, on her knees pulling weeds, her face flushed from exertion. "What are you doing?" he asked. Clara sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her brow. "I thought I might plant some herbs, medicinal ones like my father grew." Ethan studied the plot, then nodded. "It's a good idea. I'll have Jake till it properly for you tomorrow." "Thank you," Clara said, standing and brushing dirt from her skirt. "I saw some wild mint growing near the creek. I thought I might gather some." "I'll go with you," Ethan offered. "The creek bank can be slippery." They walked together to the creek that ran along the edge of Ethan's property. The water was clear and cool, and the surrounding vegetation lush from the spring rains. "There," Clara pointed to a patch of mint growing along the bank. She knelt to gather some, inhaling the fresh scent. "My mother used to make mint tea," Ethan said, watching her. "Said it cured everything from headaches to heartache." Clara looked up, surprised by the personal revelation. "My mother made it too, with honey." "The best kind," Ethan agreed, a small smile playing at his lips. As Clara reached for a particularly lush patch of mint, her foot slipped on the muddy bank. She cried out, losing her balance, but before she could fall into the creek, Ethan's strong arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "Careful," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. Clara froze, acutely aware of his body pressed against hers, his arms secure around her waist. For a moment neither moved, caught in the unexpected intimacy of the embrace. Then Ethan released her, stepping back. "The bank's not stable here. We should head back." Clara nodded, her heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with her near fall. That evening, Clara made mint tea, setting a cup at Ethan's place at the table. He looked surprised but pleased, wrapping his hands around the cup and inhaling the fragrant steam. "Just like my mother's," he said after taking a sip. "Tell me about her," Clara encouraged, curious about this man who was her husband yet still a stranger. Ethan's expression softened. "She was strong like you. Came out west with my father when this was still territory, not state. Built this ranch together from nothing." His voice grew sad. "Lost them both to influenza when I was 20. Been running the place on my own ever since." "I'm sorry," Clara said softly. "It's hard losing parents." Ethan nodded, his eyes meeting hers with understanding. For the first time, she felt a genuine connection between them, the shared experience of loss binding them in a way that their hasty marriage hadn't. As the days turned into weeks, a routine developed. Clara tended to her growing herb garden, helped with the animals when needed, and gradually made the house more her own with small touches, wildflowers in a jar on the table. A quilt she'd brought from her father's house spread across the back of a chair. Ethan worked from dawn to dusk with his cattle, but he always made time to check on Clara, bringing her seeds or plants he thought she might like for her garden, building the promised shelves for her father's books, which now lined the walls of what had become a shared sitting room. They ate their meals together, their conversations gradually becoming less stilted, more genuine. Clara learned that Ethan had a dry sense of humor that appeared when he was relaxed, and he discovered that she had a keen mind and strong opinions about everything from politics to literature. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching a summer thunderstorm roll across the plains, lightning illuminating the distant mountains, Ethan turned to Clara. "I'm headed to Santa Fe next week," he said, "to sell some cattle. I thought you might like to come along. There's a bookstore there you might enjoy." Clara's heart lifted at the thought of the trip. "I'd like that very much." The journey to Santa Fe took 2 days by wagon. They camped under the stars the first night, Ethan gallantly giving Clara the only tent while he slept by the fire. In the morning, Clara emerged to find him cooking breakfast, his hair tousled from sleep, his jaw rough with stubble. The sight stirred something within her, a warmth that had been growing steadily over the past weeks. Santa Fe was bustling compared to Albuquerque, the streets filled with a mix of Mexican, Native American, and white settlers. After securing rooms at a respectable hotel, separate rooms, as Ethan insisted, they explored the town together. The bookstore was everything Clara had hoped for, filled with volumes on medicine, botany, and literature. Ethan watched with a small smile as she moved from shelf to shelf, her excitement evident. "Choose whatever you'd like," he said. "Consider it a belated wedding gift." Clara looked up, touched by his generosity. "Thank you, Ethan. That's very kind." That evening they dined at the hotel restaurant, the nicest meal Clara had enjoyed since her father's death. Ethan had cleaned up well, his usual work clothes replaced by a proper suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and trim waist. Clara had dressed in her best, a deep blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes. "You look lovely," Ethan said as he held her chair, his voice husky. Clara blushed, unused to compliments from him. "Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself." Ethan smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his face, making him look younger, more carefree. "High praise from a woman who usually sees me covered in dust and smelling of cattle." Clara laughed, the sound light and genuine. "The cattle smell has a certain charm." Their dinner was filled with easy conversation and, to Clara's surprise, laughter. Ethan told stories of his early days learning to ranch, of mistakes and mishaps that had her giggling into her napkin. Clara shared tales of her father's patience, the colorful characters of Albuquerque who had passed through their practice. After dinner, they took a walk through the town square, where a local band was playing. Couples danced in the warm summer evening, their movements fluid under the lamplight. "Would you care to dance?" Ethan asked, holding out his hand. Clara hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. "I should warn you, I'm not very practiced." "Neither am I," Ethan admitted, leading her into the circle of dancers. "But I reckon we can figure it out together." His hand was warm at her waist, strong and secure as he guided her through the simple steps. Clara followed his lead, her body gradually relaxing as they found their rhythm together. "See, not so difficult," Ethan murmured, his eyes never leaving her face. Clara smiled up at him, suddenly aware of how close they were, of the way his eyes reflected the lamplight, of the strength in the arms that held her. "No, not difficult at all." The music slowed, and Ethan drew her closer, his hand pressing more firmly against the small of her back. Clara's breath caught in her throat at the intimacy of the position, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she allowed herself to lean slightly into his embrace, her head almost resting against his shoulder. They danced until the band finished playing, neither willing to be the first to step away. When the music finally stopped, Ethan reluctantly released her, though he kept her hand in his as they walked back to the hotel. At her door, Ethan paused. "Good night, Clara," he said softly, lifting her hand to his lips in a gesture that sent a shiver down her spine. "Good night, Ethan," she whispered, her voice unsteady. Inside her room, Clara pressed her hands to her flushed cheeks, her heart racing. Something had changed between them tonight, a shift as subtle yet as significant as the changing of seasons. The man she had married out of duty was becoming someone she looked forward to seeing each day, someone whose smile made her pulse quicken. The next day, after Ethan concluded his business selling cattle, they began the journey home. The wagon was laden with supplies for the ranch feed, tools, the books Ethan had bought for Clara, and a new dress he had insisted on purchasing when she admired it in a shop window. They were about halfway home when dark clouds began gathering on the horizon, the air growing heavy with the promise of a storm. "We should find shelter," Ethan said, scanning the landscape. "That storm looks like a bad one." Clara nodded, eyeing the threatening sky. "Is there a town nearby?" "No, but there's an old line shack about a mile east that my men use during roundup. It's not much, but it'll keep us dry." The shack was indeed humble, a single room with a small stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed. By the time they reached it, the first heavy drops of rain were falling, quickly turning into a downpour. "You take the bed," Ethan said, unloading their supplies. "I'll make do on the floor." Clara hesitated, looking at the hard-packed dirt floor. "That hardly seems fair." Ethan shrugged. "I've slept in worse conditions." The storm raged outside, thunder crashing and lightning illuminating the small shack. Ethan built a fire in the stove, and they shared a simple meal of jerky and biscuits from their supplies. Despite the rough conditions, Clara found herself enjoying the cozy intimacy of the small space, the two of them huddled around the stove's warmth. As night fell, the temperature dropped. Clara, dressed in her nightgown and wrapped in a blanket, sat on the edge of the bed, watching as Ethan spread his bedroll on the floor. "Ethan," she said hesitantly, "this is silly. The bed is small, but we could share it. It's too cold for you to sleep on the floor." Ethan looked up, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "I don't think that's a good idea, Clara." "Why not? We're husband and wife, after all." "In name only," he reminded her, echoing her own words from weeks before. "I promised I wouldn't impose on you." Clara twisted the blanket in her hands. "It's not an imposition if I'm offering." Ethan stood, his tall frame silhouetted against the stove's glow. "Clara, you don't understand. Sharing that bed with you, being that close, it would be a test of my control that I'm not sure I could pass." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Clara's heart pounded in her chest as she realized what he was saying, that he desired her, that the attraction she had been feeling wasn't one-sided. "Ethan," she said softly, standing and moving toward him. "Perhaps I want your control to slip." In the flickering light, she saw his eyes darken. "Clara, don't say things you don't mean." "I mean it," she whispered, reaching out to touch his arm. "These past weeks, getting to know you, seeing the kind of man you are, I've come to care for you, Ethan. More than I ever expected to." Ethan's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle despite the calluses on his palm. "I've cared for you from the moment I saw you in that church, looking so brave despite your grief." Clara leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. "When my father made his dying wish, I thought he was condemning me to a loveless marriage. I never imagined that there could be more," Ethan finished for her. "That duty could turn to something else." Clara nodded, her eyes meeting his. "Yes." Ethan's thumb traced the line of her cheekbone. "You married me out of duty, Clara. I won't take advantage of that." Clara placed her hand over his. "Then let me make it desire," she whispered, echoing the sentiment that had been building within her. For a moment, Ethan remained still, searching her eyes. Then, with a groan, he lowered his head, his lips finding hers in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened as Clara responded, her arms winding around his neck. "Clara," he murmured against her lips. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," she breathed, her body pressed against his. "I want to be your wife in more than name." Ethan. His arms tightened around her, lifting her easily as he carried her to the narrow bed. Their lovemaking was tender yet passionate, Ethan's experience guiding Clara through her first intimacy with patience and care. And afterward, as they lay tangled together in the small bed, the storm still raging outside, Clara felt a sense of rightness, of coming home. "I love you," Ethan whispered into her hair, the words simple yet profound. Clara's heart swelled with joy. "I love you too," she replied, amazed at how true the words were. They returned to the ranch the next day, their relationship transformed. Though they maintained a proper appearance in public, in private they explored their new intimacy with enthusiasm and growing affection. Ethan moved his belongings into Clara's room, making it truly their shared space. Clara continued to expand her herb garden, and when word spread of her knowledge of medicine, people from neighboring ranches began to seek her out for remedies and advice. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Ethan took her hand. "I've been thinking," he said. "Your father's practice is still sitting empty in town." Clara nodded. "I know, I should probably sell it, but I haven't been able to bring myself to do it." "What if we didn't sell it?" Ethan suggested. "What if you reopened it, not as a doctor's office, but as an apothecary, selling your remedies, treating minor ailments? You could go into town a few days a week." Clara stared at him, stunned by the suggestion. "You would support that?" Ethan squeezed her hand. "Clara, I've seen how much you enjoy helping people, how talented you are. Your father taught you well. It seems a shame to waste that knowledge." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. "But a woman running a business—" "Times are changing," Ethan said firmly. "And anyone who has a problem with it will have to answer to me." Clara laughed through her tears, leaning over to kiss him. "Thank you," she whispered, "for understanding what this would mean to me." The apothecary opened in the fall, operating 3 days a week in what had been her father's practice. Clara sold herbal remedies, bandages, and provided basic medical care. Many of her father's former patients came to her, trusting in the knowledge he had passed down. On the days she was in town, Ethan would come in for lunch, proud to be seen supporting his wife's endeavor. And on the days she was at the ranch, she continued to help with the animals, her knowledge of medicine proving valuable for the livestock as well. Winter came to New Mexico, bringing with it shorter days and crisp, cold nights. Clara and Ethan spent the evenings by the fire, reading from her growing collection of books or simply talking, their connection deepening with each passing day. It was on such an evening, with snow falling gently outside, that Clara shared her news. "Ethan," she said, setting aside her book, "I have something to tell you." Ethan looked up, his expression curious. "What is it, love?" Clara took his hand, placing it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." Ethan's face transformed with joy. He lifted her into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed. "A baby," he repeated, his voice filled with wonder. "Our baby." He set her down gently, his hands framing her face. "You've made me the happiest man alive, Clara Summers." Clara smiled, tears of happiness in her eyes. "And you've given me a life I never dared to dream of." That night, as they lay in bed together, Ethan's hand protective over her stomach, Clara thought about the journey that had brought them here, from a marriage of duty to a union of deep and abiding love. Her father's dying wish had seemed like a sentence at the time, but it had turned out to be the greatest gift he could have given her. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan murmured, his voice drowsy. Clara turned in his arms, pressing a kiss to his chest. "About how sometimes the things we resist the most turn out to be exactly what we need." Ethan's arms tightened around her. "I thank God every day that your father asked for my hand for you. I never would have had the courage to court you otherwise." "Why not?" Clara asked, curious. You were the doctor's daughter, educated, refined. I was just a rancher with dirt under my fingernails and calluses on my hands." Clara traced the line of his jaw. "And the kindest heart, the strongest character, and the gentlest touch I've ever known." As spring returned to New Mexico, Clara's pregnancy progressed. Her apothecary continued to thrive, though she reduced her hours as her due date approached. Ethan hovered protectively, ensuring she didn't overexert herself, though he respected her independence enough not to smother her. In June, with the desert in full bloom, their son was born, Thomas Ethan Summers, named for both their fathers. He had Ethan's green eyes and Clara's auburn hair, a perfect blend of them both. "He's beautiful," Ethan whispered, cradling his son with hands that had worked cattle and built fences, but now held his child with infinite tenderness. Clara watched them, her heart full to bursting. The family she had lost had been replaced by one of her own making, a family born of duty but sustained by love. As young Thomas grew, so did the ranch and Clara's business. By the time their son was 2, they had expanded the ranch, added a proper clinic to the house for Clara's patients who couldn't make it to town, and were expecting their second child. One evening, as they sat on the porch swing watching Thomas toddle after a butterfly, Clara leaned against Ethan's shoulder. "Did you ever imagine we would be here?" she asked. "That first day when the sheriff came to tell you my father's dying wish." Ethan shook his head, his arm around her shoulders. "Never. I thought I was doing my duty, honoring a debt. I never dreamed I was being given the greatest gift of my life." Clara smiled, placing his hand on her swollen belly where their second child kicked vigorously. "Our daughter is going to be strong like her father, and wise like her mother," Ethan added, kissing the top of Clara's head. Their daughter, Sarah Rose Summers, was born in the winter with a lusty cry that declared her presence to the world. Thomas, now almost 3, peered at his sister with solemn curiosity before declaring, "She's loud." Ethan laughed, ruffling his son's hair. "That she is, son. Strong lungs mean a strong spirit." As the years passed, the Summers family grew and thrived. Clara's apothecary expanded, eventually employing a young woman as an apprentice. Ethan's ranch became one of the most successful in the territory, known for its fair treatment of workers and quality stock. Thomas and Sarah were joined by another brother, James, completing their family. The children grew up surrounded by love, learning the value of hard work from their father and compassion from their mother. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised Clara with a trip back to Santa Fe, to the hotel where they had danced on that pivotal night. They left the children with Mrs. Donovan, now a beloved grandmother figure to them. In their hotel room, Ethan presented Clara with a gift, a leather-bound journal with her name embossed on the cover. "For all your remedies and medical notes," he explained. "I thought it was time they were properly recorded." Clara traced the letters of her name. "Clara Summers, apothecary," she read, her voice thick with emotion. "It's perfect, Ethan, thank you." "There's something else," Ethan said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small box, opening it to reveal a gold ring set with a small sapphire that matched her eyes. "I couldn't afford a proper ring when we married. I wanted to give you one now, to show you that what began as duty has become the greatest joy of my life." Tears filled Clara's eyes as Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, beside the simple gold band she had worn for a decade. "I love you, Ethan Summers," she whispered, drawing him down for a kiss. "More with each passing day." "And I love you, Clara Summers," he murmured against her lips. "My wife, my heart, my greatest blessing." They danced again that night in the same town square under the same stars. But this time, there was no hesitation, No uncertainty, just the fluid movement of two people whose lives had become so intertwined that they moved as one. Their love a dance that had begun in duty but blossomed into desire, respect, and a deep, abiding devotion that would carry them through all the years to come. 20 years after that fateful day when Clara had watched her father die in the dust of Albuquerque's Main Street, she stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching as her eldest son rode in from the fields. So like his father, it made her heart ache with pride. Ethan's arm slipped around her waist, his touch as familiar and beloved as the beat of her own heart. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Summers." Clara leaned into his embrace, her head finding its accustomed place on his shoulder. "I was thinking about how life takes unexpected turns. How what seems like an ending can actually be a beginning." Ethan pressed a kiss to her temple, his love for her undimmed by the passing years. "Your father was a wise man. He knew what we needed before we did." Clara smiled, thinking of the man who had bound them together with his dying wish. "He knew you were a good man, Ethan. He trusted you to take care of me. Little did he know you would end up taking care of half the county," Ethan said with a chuckle, referring to Clara's thriving practice that now included a proper nurse and even occasionally a visiting doctor. Clara laughed, the sound as bright and clear as it had been when they first fell in love. And little did he know that what began as a marriage of duty would become the greatest love story I could have imagined. Ethan turned her in his arms, his green eyes, now lined with the evidence of years of laughter and life lived fully, looking into hers with the same devotion they had held for 2 decades. "You married me out of duty, Clara Summers, but I meant what I said all those years ago." "What was that?" Clara asked, though she knew the answer had carried the words in her heart through all their years together. Ethan's smile was tender as he brushed a strand of hair, now streaked with silver, from her face. "I said, then let me make it desire, and every day since I've tried to do just that." Clara stretched up to kiss him, her heart as full of love for this man as it had been on that stormy night in a lined shack when she had first given herself to him. "You succeeded, my love. Beyond my wildest dreams, you succeeded." As the sun set over their ranch, painting the New Mexico sky in shades of gold and crimson, Clara and Ethan Summers stood wrapped in each other's arms, a testament to the truth that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings can lead to the most beautiful journeys, and that a marriage born of duty can, with patience, kindness, and unwavering devotion, blossom into the deepest and most enduring love.